welcome to One Life Mechanics, talking about telepathy. Is it even real? I am here to tell you that it is in fact real, and I personally know people who have experienced telepathy in their everyday lives. One person, she was a waitress, and she actually heard the order of a patron without them actually saying something. So she brought this order out to them, and when it arrived, they were very surprised because they didn't actually verbally order it. And they said, how do you know that this is what I wanted? And she's like, well, you told me. And he said, no, actually I didn't. They weren't upset about it, but they were very surprised. So that's just one example. But, you know, not everyone hears things auditorially. When I teach my class on animal communication, what I tell people is that, you know, everyone has a different way of hearing or interpreting with the heart, meaning that some people are very auditory. They hear words, they hear sounds. Other people see colors or they see pictures. Other people are very sensory, very tactile, kinesthetic. So they feel things on their skin or they feel things in their body. Other people have a very strong sense of smell, and different scents remind them of different things. Olfactory being a very powerful sense of memory and meaning. So when people hear things or they interpret things from their heart, it can take on different forms, and there is no best form of hearing or understanding. It's simply that people have different interpretations that are stronger to their own senses. Other people are just very clairsentient, meaning they just know things without knowing how they know them. And so ideas will pop into their head without them knowing where they came from. And sometimes it's going to be a little disconcerting to get these messages because you're wide open. Your third eye is wide open. Your heart is wide open. You are feeling, you are sensing, you are seeing, and you are seeing the truth, whatever that may be. And it can be rather disconcerting because seeing the truth is not always pleasant. To see the flaws of those around you is sometimes a gift and sometimes not so much. Sometimes you might be so overwhelmed with what you are suddenly knowing that you can't hear the conversation in the room. And it can be a lot to handle at one time. But you can shut these abilities off if you want to. It's just a matter of being very clear as to why you're doing that. You can talk to your guides in the same way. It can be very powerful, very intense. And sometimes they have very intense messages for you. Sometimes you need to see the truth of the situation because you are going in a direction that is counter to your own highest good and of those around you. To be really honest with yourself is to see the truth. And yet it's not always advisable to hear thoughts and to hear people and what they're thinking because they're thinking a lot of different things. They might be worried about stuff. They might be judging themselves or others. It's not always pleasant. It's not an ability that one necessarily seeks. But sometimes it ends up being there. Or sometimes you really do want to convey a message to someone. I think one of the most obvious ways that we use telepathy sort of in everyday life is when we get upset with someone and we start having conversations with them in our head. And we think to ourselves, that's not really happening in the ethers. They're not actually receiving that. Well, kind of yes and kind of no. I mean, yes, it does depend on how perceptive they are to telepathy and to their own feelings, which if you're upset with them, they may or may not be. But they are probably receiving those waves in some form or fashion. I think some of the most interesting ways that I have received communication from people is through text message or like emotion. So they're actually sending a text message, but they attach so much emotion behind it that when I open the text message, I feel this wave, this physical sensation rush over my body. And it's not always pleasant because they might be upset with me. Or they might be very excited, and then I get excited, and then I kind of like wasn't expecting that rush. Or maybe they feel very loving and warm, and suddenly I'm just like wanting to give things to everybody all the time. So, boundaries, right? Boundaries are very important in telepathic communications, particularly with people. Not so much with animals. Animals are, I mean, it's their primary way of communicating is through telepathy, through the communication of the heart, which is very simple to do. All you have to do is connect your heart chakra with a cord of light to the animal's heart chakra, or to the person, and just say hello to see if they even want to talk to you. In the case of human beings, most of the time you'll get a hold of their higher self because their conscious self is not available for communication. They are not aware of empathic or telepathic contacts, and so they're just sort of not open for business. Most of the time, if you ask them later, hey, did you get that message that, I communicated to you in a moment ago? They will have no idea what you're talking about. So don't be surprised if that's the case. They might be aware of your communication on a sort of lesser level. Maybe they were thinking of you, or maybe they felt something in relation to you, but they're not aware that it came from you specifically. So the best creatures to talk to if you're going to be practicing telepathy is animals, because that is their primary way of communication to begin with, is through emotions, is through physicality, the way they move. And realistically, they have a much cleaner field to communicate with than humans do. So usually if there's a class on telepathy, it's going to be in relation to animal communication, which is a great place to start. But if you're going to be talking telepathically, really have a good reason for doing that. Going on rants with people instead of telling them in person how you feel may not be healthy. It's better to just talk to them in person, like, hey, this is how I feel, that I was upset, or this is how I feel about you. The opportunity to be vulnerable is what being human is all about. It's about communication and relationships and feeling things and being honest. That is everything. So I wouldn't resort to telepathy as a primary way of communication, but if you are sending love to someone or you are sending healing to someone, by all means. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Namaste. The divine in me bows to the divine wisdom in you. However, these are some things to keep in mind, right? Another tip on ways of improving your telepathic skills is to, of course, meditate, simply because it puts your mind in a relaxed state of being, but also to unfocus your eyes and to sit with nature and to just kind of feel the space that's surrounding you, and allowing that to sort of permeate your being more willing to be in your body, willing to feel, willing to communicate with a larger world that actually has a lot of information to convey to you. And listening to the deeper silence. If you're going to focus on telepathy, allow it to be a form of communication between you and Source and your guides, to really listen, to really become more aware of the subtle messages that are being conveyed to you, like a daily download, like your daily news feed from the stars every day. And and to become very aware of how that information can really improve your life, to really improve your communication with yourself, and help you to interact with others in a more positive, uplifting form. Telepathy is one of those things that we just don't think about when we consider nature. And yet, talking telepathically with nature is one of the greatest gifts that we have while being physically alive. Talking to ourselves, talking to the trees, the wind, the mountains, to crystals, to animals, to whatever, to situations. When we are projecting our thoughts into the future or the things that we do want, we are also, in a way, contacting those people, those connections that we would also like to make. And so sending that connection, love, and gratitude is an amazing way to use your abilities for the highest good. Sometimes, yes, with close family members or people that you really care about, perhaps a closer connection is truly useful. But more importantly, I think it's good to be aware of how our thoughts about others do travel out into the ethers and can affect people. You know, like the text messages I was talking about earlier, it can be like opening emotional spam or with a virus. You know, if I'm opening a text message that, it's like one of those really long text messages where they got upset at some point and they just started putting words into the digital world. That's what I'm talking about. Like, really be careful, really sit with your words and how they might affect people, how they might land, how they might affect their cells. Because I have, with a very innocent question or two, triggered people into sending me waves of energy that just rippled like prickles and stings all the way down my body. And they were probably not aware that that's something they were intentionally doing, but it did happen, and it hurt, physically hurt. So really be aware, as a person that chooses to be more energetically sensitive, how you are affecting other people, and to forgive those that have no idea what they're projecting out into the world, and maybe just choosing to have good boundaries and not interact with those people at all. It's not worth it. You just don't need to be there, because unless they are willing to change and grow, what are you really doing? What is the point of interacting in that way? And ask yourself why you are choosing telepathy as a form of communication rather than actual verbal, calling them up on the phone or meeting them in person communication. Be very conscious about this skill that you may or may not need in this particular lifetime. It can be very entertaining, and I'm not saying it's one way or the other. Just be aware. Be aware of how it affects you, because the emotions that you convey in that communication are very, sometimes physically relevant. And animals in particular are very good at communicating in this way. They're very loving, they're very kind, and it's really the best way to learn this skill if you're going to improve that side of yourself at all. So I hope that these tips really kind of help you to get like a better understanding of why you're interested in this topic and how you're using it. And then also to just have really good psychic boundaries with these things. Don't be turning your thoughts to people unless you're sort of wanting to communicate them. It's sort of like staying in your own energy lane unless it's really necessary. Be aware of what you're projecting out into the world, and just allowing other connections that do not serve you as much, just let them go. It's okay. Something else will fill that void, and it will probably be much better for having been Marie Kondo cleaned out until that section of connection brings you your highest joy. So I hope some of these tips help you in your telepathic interests and possibly endeavors. And I'll see you next time on Life Mechanics.